Thanks so much for that. I am so excited to be here with you at Nudgestock because I believe that behavioral economics and science applied to design is the most powerful tool of innovation right now. And I want to talk to you a bit about how my team at Lloyd's Banking Group is using that combination of behavioral science and design to move forward. So first of all, as mentioned in the intro, I'm a designer. My goal is to bring moments of joy and impact to people's lives. And for the last 10 years, I've done that in Silicon Valley for some big tech companies. And so you can imagine it was a bit of an emotional challenge to kind of move across the ocean 2 years ago and to now say that in addition to a designer, I am a banker. Because for a lot of people, banking and design, it just feels kind of like an oxymoron. And you can see why. You know, when I was at Google, I was wondering, should I go into banking at all? And I did this search. And I used Google's autocomplete data results as an insight into the current state of finances and design. So if you do this search in Google for finances are, you'll see a pretty incredible list of the top terms that people are actually searching on. So finances are ruining my marriage. They're stressing me out. They're tight. They're out of control. This is such a data-driven snapshot of how disconnected people are from money. So what an amazing place to go to solve one of the great unsolved problems about how to make finances more human. But you know, the conversation right now, particularly when it comes to the future of banking, is all about hashtag fintech. And while clearly I love technology, given the companies I've worked for, it's not just about fintech. In fact, I feel like my goal as a designer in banking is to help people just make sense of their finances. So I don't know if this hashtag will catch on. You got 25,000 of y'all, maybe y'all can start it, but this is really about bringing together the left and the right brains, because banking is traditionally very analytical and rational, and the right brain is a little bit more intuitive and creative. And I think those of you that have been tinkering with applied behavioral science know that we have new insights about how the brain works and how to get it all to work together. So let me talk a little bit about the organization of design at Lloyd's Banking Group, and then I'll share a little bit more about how we're thinking about a brand new metaphor in banking, because no matter how much you do behavioral science applied to the space, you're not going to have breakthroughs unless you have a new environment. And then I'll end with a couple of insights on how we're applying some principles to design. So the way that we think about innovation, many of you have seen this diagram, is around technical, human, and business factors of innovation. And, you know, the technical bits, which is all about feasibility, what can we do? And the business bits, which is all about viability, are pretty strong, actually, within banking in general. It's the human bits about desirability which needs to be amplified. So the first thing that I did a couple years ago when I joined as the first chief design officer at Lloyd's Banking Group was to pull together all of the capabilities across the organization around what I'll call big D design. So we have everything from design research to systemic or systems design, service design, business design, etc. And you know, we actually haven't yet formally created our behavioral design guild, but we're just about to start that because we're starting to apply insights from behavioral design, from behavioral science into design. So we pulled all of these teams into one unified design group. Here's what they look like, a really cool, awesome group of folks from across the UK. And the first thing that this team did when they came together was to define what is our purpose. And given that Lloyd's Banking Group's mission is to help Britain prosper, the team quite simply said, well, we're here to design for prosperity. And which is a wonderful thing to put design at the strategic core of a company's mission, but it's also a little bit vague. So I challenged the team to articulate it at a deeper level. And so the team came back with, what if prosperity is helping people just end the day a bit better than it started? Now this applies to households or businesses at any stage. And all of a sudden, this phrase put the team directly into the thinking of habit formation. Well, how do we make prosperity tangible on a daily basis? And we said, well, what does prosperity actually mean to people? So we have these design labs across all of our studios across the UK. And of course, we bring people in for usability research. But more and more, we're doing co-creation and we're doing Lego creative play. And we did this session where we had people map out their finances. And by the way, we're going to do a little bit of a co-creation session together. So I know you've already been warned, but please get your Post-it note or paper and something to draw with, because in a little bit, I'm going to have you draw. Get ready. It'll be fun. Don't worry. We'll get through it. So when we ask people to describe what finances mean to them, what does prosperity mean to them, they actually didn't talk about bank accounts and numbers. They talked about relationships and moments in life or moments in their business evolution. So this is one example where people mapped out what prosperity is. And it's all about my spouse, my partner, my kids, milestones in life. And we started recognizing that the language of banking is really foreign to how people think about money. And so we started creating this life map of these key moments and asking ourselves the question, how well are we preparing people for these moments when it comes to their finances? I've got a couple of kids that have recently left the home, and I've never talked to any financial institution about those moments, but I'm feeling all this anxiety about, I got a son in China who, apart from all the COVID bits, which are worrying, there's also like, does he know how to pay bills? Does he have the right kind of credit card? I mean, is he ready for that kind of stage of life? So we started to try to balance that left brain bank thinking with stories. And so we have this amazing storytelling team of videographers and animators and illustrators, and we actually created a graphic novel about what would banking be like if it was much more human around this idea of life moments. And it was really pretty amazing because we're almost doing internal behavioral science experiments on how do these new ways of describing things resonate. So we have something in our backlog around real-time notifications on iOS and Android. And this little story here about a father and a daughter just managing their finances on the go helped bring that kind of empathetic and emotional quality. And so we're starting to concept out some dashboards like this that start to lay out aspects of life and how do financial services fit into that. And even more importantly, we actually had this little concept of a view of your banking profile of relationships. Well, here's me, and here's my spouse, and here's my parents, and here's where I live, and here's where I work. And there's actually pretty important financial relationships that are circling around these views. And so we're in the early phases of seeing how this will play out. But when we started looking at how do you go beyond that, as we looked at other parts of the dashboard, we just started getting into kind of normal metaphors of dials and bars and charts. And we realized we needed a new metaphor. So I'm going to talk a bit about a metaphor, then I'll get into some behavioral science bits. So don't worry. We'll get there in a second. So first of all, we realize that the metaphor that we're in now in the financial world is actually comes from the 1400s. And this is one of our archivists up at the Bank of Scotland up in Edinburgh. These are our founding documents from the bank. And there's loads and loads of these books. These books are called ledgers. And this ledger was a metaphor borrowed from the church in the 1400s as a really structured way to look at information and attendance and contributions. And some banker, in the 1400s, some weekend was like, hashtag fintech innovation. Let's take this ledger and apply it to banking. And it took off because we never really had this way of structuring financial information with trust. And now, 450 plus years later, when we look at experiences in banking as we digitize and go mobile, etc., I ask myself, have we really gone beyond that ledger? And maybe it's time for a new metaphor. So one example of the power of new metaphors comes from computer science. This was 18th century weaving looms. These are punch cards from the 1800s. And this was the first human-computer interface. I don't know if any of you ever remember back in the day programming these punch cards on mainframes, but this is how we interacted with technology. And it was only for the elite few that could understand it. And then there's this amazing era where digital typewriters started to create these command line interfaces where you could have this direct conversation with technology. But still, you needed to be a programmer or a developer to really know how to have this interface. And Back in 1974, this gentleman, Tim Mott in Xerox PARC, was a sociologist doing research with ordinary folks. Like, how do they want to use computers? And he brought them in and they did some co-creation. And one of the sessions, this one woman said, well, I just wish computers was like going to the office where I've got a desktop and I've got an inbox and I've got some files and I can just copy and paste. And this napkin sketch that Tim wrote back in 1974 became the prototype for the Alto computer that Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak used to launch a whole new generation of computing with the Mac and beyond. And it was this new metaphor, this moment democratized access to technology. We need this moment in banking. We're still in that kind of punch card command line interface era. So maybe we can discover a bit of that metaphor together. So now is the moment that I want you to grab your piece of paper and something to draw with, because I'm just going to give you 60 seconds, very simple question, to draw an answer to the question of, what are your finances like? Are you ready? Just going to draw whatever comes to mind. It could be an image, it could be abstract or concrete. It answers the question, my finances are like. Ready? Your mark, get set, go. This is where I probably should have planned for some Jeopardy music or something, but we got about 45 seconds left. There's no wrong answer to this activity. All right, we're about halfway done. And I'm not going to be able to see all of these, but reach out to me on Twitter, MAK0SKI. I'd love to send me your pictures of your metaphors because I want to see what you're creating. All right, we're in the last 10 seconds. Y'all ready? All right. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, great. So we did this exact same activity in one of our branches. This is our Halifax branch in Cannon Street in London, and we did it all over the place, but we turned our branches into a design studio, and we actually asked customers kind of a bunch of questions, but then we engaged them and had them draw their finances. And I just want to show you some of the examples that came out. Maybe these are similar to what you just drew yourself. So some people said, my finances are like an endless to-do list. This is almost like that negative feeling of the ledger, right? It's kind of difficult. It's all in the past. I don't know if I can even control it. Or even an open prison. My finances, I'm just totally trapped. But the gate is open. If I just knew how to make my way out, everything would be okay. Or even take this one. I love this one. My income is a well. The water comes in, and I've got this savings barrel set aside, which is buried and leaking, by the way. And then I've got this pail, which is my wallet. And as I walk over, I forget about, my goals sometimes. And, my habits aren't always formed. So I'll just buy something extra at the grocery store, or I'll go to the movie theater. And by the time I get to the savings barrel, there's nothing left. So these new metaphors are getting us engaged in a new way of thinking. Now, one of the most powerful metaphors that we've looked at is the journey. Now, this woman, she did this really amazing sketch with us and some Lego prototyping where she said, I'm here at the bottom, and it's not just me, it's my partner, and I want to be to the top. The top is happiness, a home, and 100,000 pounds saved up. And I just need to know what my options are. How do I get there? So we started looking at this notion of the journey, because the ledger is all about the past. We need a metaphor about the future. And we gathered this team together, and particularly right there in the middle, Seema Thakur is one of our branch consultants. And she started working with us in trying to think about ways we could almost kind of recreate a Seema 2.0 in kind of the way we do chatbots and virtual assistants, but also in physical media. So we created this plan. And this was kind of a life map, and we had the opportunity for folks to put different life moments on there. This is our first really rough prototype, but it was amazing because even in our first round, the people that we were working with, they loved it so much they wanted to keep it. In fact, one participant said, I want to put this up on my fridge. Now, what banking interface do you know of is so trusted and valued that it's put up right next to your family photos on the fridge. And so we kind of knew we were onto something. And when you think about this new metaphor of the journey, it's kind of like where driving was decades ago. Like I had to learn on a road atlas, and it was really complicated. You'd have to pull over. And then many of you remember the MapQuest era of turn-by-turn directions, which revolutionized getting from point A to point B. You could rely on this plan. But God forbid you take a left turn when you're supposed to go right, or you miss that 8.2 miles next direction. And so we're looking now at the GPS and auto rerouting algorithms, and driving is a much different experience today. And this is where technology and new metaphors can assist us. So, all right, I'm going to wrap up here with some thoughts on how do we using behavioral science and behavioral economics insight. So first of all, we started creating this new design language to unlock everyone's ability to connect with finances and to have strengthened financial well-being. And originally we were looking at these attributes. These are the kind of typical things design teams in banking look like how much do you know about finances in terms of literacy? How much time are you able to give to engaging with your finances across mobile, web, etc.? What is your access and inclusion? And what about your current state in terms of well-being? And we realized that these variables didn't quite have the habit changing impacts we wanted. So we looked at these 4 new areas that come from the world of behavioral economics. So these are not going to be unfamiliar to this group, but let me just walk through really quickly how we're thinking here. So number 1, goal orientation. How many of you have a goal to be physically fit? Right? We probably all do. Those of you that have an approach orientation towards goals probably are thinking about, okay, well, here's what I want to accomplish next month. Here's what I'm going to do today. I've got a plan. You take a goal and you break it down into steps that you can accomplish. Those of you that avoid goals are like, yeah, I want to work out someday. I don't know exactly what I'll do, but I'm sure it's going to be awesome. And clearly those that have more of an approach mentality are more likely to form new healthy habits. The second one is conscientiousness. And this one is around, if you think about those that are more impulsive, that live in the moment and kind of make spontaneous decisions, they're not quite as good with their money as those that are thinking more about the future and conscientious behavior. The other one we look at is optimism. It turns out that those that are, have a more positive outlook on life in general are more likely to actually meet their goals and change habits. And then finally, this came from a professor at the London School of Economics, this idea of locus of control. If you're asked the question, do you feel like you have the power to change things in your life? If you say, yes, I do, I've got the power inside of me, I can do anything, then that locus goes inside of you, it's internal. If you say, I don't really have power, that's elsewhere, then it's external. So the more that it's internal, the more likely you are to make change. So we've started to think about how do we create a system that understands where different customers lie against those principles, so that whether it's a mobile app or a conversation or a branch in-person view, we can adapt our guidance to them. So here's one example. If you avoid setting goals, well, maybe in our mobile app, this little concept was around, well, let's break it down and let's create this adaptive interface that says you should spend this much at this frequency for this goal. And you can, of course, tweak any variable, but it just makes it easier for you to be kind of more connected to goals. Or another one is, if you're not particularly conscientious, well, let's kind of give you a nudge a couple of weeks before you're likely to go into overdraft by saying, hey, heads up, we got some bills coming up. And actually, we used this kind of thinking on recently with how we address gambling controls. So we've identified that gambling for some is an addiction, and that particularly in the wee hours of the night, for someone that has a significant portion of their income spent on gambling, that behavioral scientists have told us that if you actually can break some of these addictive routines by having just a little bit of friction of at least 8 minutes, or actually 8 seconds, you can start to bring back some of the rational brain into thinking about things. We're not trying to police whether gambling's okay or not. There's a whole data ethics question there, but we've started to have some really positive impact for those that would otherwise not want to be addicted and use our banking interfaces to help them. So, a little snapshot of what we're trying to do. I wish I could show you more. There's so much tinkering in our labs behind the scenes. But I encourage all of you on your journey towards bringing together the left and the right brains together to applying technology, hashtag fintech, with intuition, FinSense, and behavioral science to make some real breakthroughs. And the last thing I'll say is, this is our CTO. And we recently took this photo together and we swapped glasses, which was a nice metaphor on how we need to look through each other's eyes. And for me as a design leader, it's been so powerful to look at the power of technology to really accelerate design. And vice versa, our CTO now is looking at how do we think about empathy as a way of progressing the way that we use technology. And now, at the end of the day, it's all about creative confidence, whether you're applying behavioral economics or design. There's a great book out there, many of you may have known this, called Creative Confidence, written by the Kelly brothers, who found some of the co-founders of IDEO. And if you don't have time to read it, I'll leave you with this one thought. Get into a place where you feel just a little bit uncomfortable, just a little out of your zone. For me, that's Pineapple Dance Studios in London with a bunch of 20-something, millennials taking a hip-hop dance class. And I do this several times a week because it puts me completely out of my comfort zone. And this is allowing me to just think in a new way. And we're trying to apply this same mentality of how do we nudge people just to that next level. It might be a little uncomfortable, but not so uncomfortable so that they can get that dopamine rush of satisfaction when they really get nudged to true prosperity. Thank you so much.
Well done. That was absolutely fantastic. And I've got about 20 questions I'd love to ask myself. However, there are some fantastic questions already on Slido. Now, it's worth remembering that this is sponsored in part by the B2B Institute. And one of the things we've noticed working with them is that the biases you find within institutions are actually greater than the biases you find within individuals. And the great question asked here is, did you encounter resistance as a designer when you first joined the bank? Because it's an interesting thing. Designers traditionally all want to join Apple or Nike. And I always go, yeah, but you've already got lots of great marketing thinking in those companies. The impact you can have there is potentially minor, whereas in a bank, that's really talking. How did you find it when you first joined?
Yeah, well, first of all, there was a lot of thirst for a new level of empathy and creativity, because with a bank that cares about helping Britain prosper, there's an openness. But I have to say, not owning a suit and rocking up to headquarters and going to like board meetings, I definitely look and feel very different, and that sometimes it's tough to move the needle in the way that you would in an Apple. But I have to say, the most important thing is that folks are open and they're willing to go on this journey. So it's worth putting up with that imposter syndrome that I feel walking through the halls of Lloyd's, not feeling like I quite belong.
And great question also. What are you most proud of changing at Lloyd's so far, and indeed in the future?
The thing I'm most proud of so far has been real-time notifications that are now smart. So, in a transactional banking world, knowing what's happening with your finances has always been key, but giving a little bit of intelligence to those notifications, even just the responses we get when we say, hey, we noticed this bill, which has been regular for the last couple of months, it's a little bit higher than usual. You might want to, check that out. We get reactions from folks that are just incredible because they feel like they now have a help to track their finances and they're not alone in doing that. So I think there's a lot more to be done in the real-time notification space. It's super humble. It's not like a Project Aura, but it's really, it impacts people in a very detailed way.
This is something that absolutely fascinates me, because when you have a very, very left brain institutional culture, which you tend to find, by the way, in finance, you also find it in engineering and tech.
Sure.
And I'm going to qualify the use of the word left brain in a second, by the way, because we've got an angry person on Slido about that. And I'm going to raise that a little bit.
Sure.
They tend to define everything as a kind of mathematical optimization problem, not as a psychological problem. And people with their finances are probably more concerned about certainty and ambiguity avoidance than they are about the pure optimization of wealth. And of course, if you're in a banking culture, that's completely incomprehensible to you at first, because everybody around you essentially has the same mental schema for the world.
Yeah.
And one of the things that drives me nuts is that if I put money into my pension, I don't get a text to confirm that more money has gone in. I've got to wait 6 months for a pension statement, remember that I paid in money, and remember to check. It's never going to happen. Okay, this is crazy. And the second thing I always notice is that because it's so difficult to pay a one-off payment into a pension, it's a double whammy. So it's what you call goo, it's difficult to do. But also because the process is gooey, it also feels weird. And you instinctively feel, well, if this were a normal thing to do, to top up my pension with an ad hoc amount, they would have made it easy to do. So the fact that this involves me finding a letter and posting a stamp must mean that I'm doing something really weird. So you actually create a double level of goo there, I think.
There's so many examples of that, I think, in the finance world of, what a designer would say is like thoughtless processes. And I think the advantage of having design within the heart of banking is that we can be more conscious because, as you're right, banking thinks often in terms of optimization, but the real innovations in banking are going to come from the heart and from emotions and how people feel about things. Like one example, during the COVID crisis, we called all of our vulnerable customers, our more elderly, kind of sheltering at home folks. And the only protocol for the call was, how are you doing? That was it. No upsell, no, what products do you need? And some of our customers hung up on us because they're like, what bank would do that? This is a fraud, right? But many of our other customers had a chance to talk about how they're really suffering, and we just listened. And we need more of that kind of interaction to open up the heart in banking because the finances will follow.
Just one final comment. Someone has questioned the use of the left brain, right brain metaphor.
Yeah.
Now, to be honest, a metaphor to be useful doesn't have to be true. It simply can be useful. Secondly, read the work of Ian McGilchrist, who is a neuroscientist who know this, who believes in the divide.
I mean, the reality is that it's not dichotomous like that. It's just a useful way to say that in banking, they lean with the rational side. The reality is even those who are focused on engineering or tech or banking have lots of creativity. And designers also have lots of data-driven, rational thinking too. So I totally agree that I was very simplistic with that metaphor.
No. I'm by and large on your side. That is absolutely fantastic. And now with the third Dan in the row, it's time for me to hand over to Daniel Bennett. Thanks very much.
Appreciate
Dan,
it.
that was fantastic.